While conservation is a rapidly growing sector, careers in the field are not that mainstream. Breaking into the field can often be challenging as jobs are limited but competition high. Contrary to popular belief, a degree in life sciences such as ecology, zoology, or evolution is not mandatory. Skills like fundraising, marketing, economics, sociology, or even data science is in high demand in this field. Unfortunately, these skills are rarely part of higher education curriculums. One organization by the name of Conservation Career is attempting to change this. Founded in 2013 by Dr. Nick Askew, the organization has helped 700,000 conservationists in 178 countries across the globe with their careers. This ranges from their conservation job board, training courses, and career coaching. Welcome, Nick, to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Anish. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
What motivated you to have a career in conservation?
Yeah, so I think really what got me connected to wildlife and nature in the first instance was as a teenager, I spent a lot of time fishing, really being totally immersed in nature, trying and often failing to catch fish. But whilst I was fishing, I would be seeing and hearing birds flying past. I'd see the butterflies and I'd see all the insects, and I'd take an interest in trying to name the plants. And really, having done that for a long time, I became more interested in the wildlife surrounding me than just trying to catch fish. And it's a great hobby for that, for kind of immersing yourself kind of in wildlife. From there, I then went and did a degree at university in ecology, like specializing really in kind of, wildlife and wildlife science, if you like. And then that led me, into other aspects, which I guess we'll talk about a little bit more soon. But yeah, it very much started from a passion for fishing, really, as a teenager.
So talk to us about your career in brief.
My career in brief. So in a nutshell, yes, as you just heard, I did a degree in ecology. During my university degree, I spent a lot of time volunteering as a conservationist. So I ran the University Conservation Volunteer Group, which meant we went out every weekend, going out and helping to conserve different wildlife sites around the university. And through that, I met lots of people who were working in conservation, one of which became my best friend. He managed a series of nature reserves around the York area. And we lived together for several years, and I spent all my free time out on the reserves, monitoring the bird species, catching and ringing the bird species. We'd be managing the site, digging ponds, putting up fences, whatever needed to be done. And so really I spent more time volunteering and building my experience than probably in the lecture theatres, kind of learning about conservation more sort of academically. That led me directly into doing a PhD studying barn owls, particularly because the area we were working and living in had a very high density of barn owls internationally. So we had something like 100 pairs, within our kind of local patch, which was a really high density. So we were asking the question, like, why is this area so important for birds? And what can we learn from this population that we can then apply to others? And so I spent 4 or 5 years really trying to answer that question, following barn owls, radio tracking them, doing habitat studies, catching their prey, all that sort of stuff, trying to learn lessons. At the end of all that, really enjoyed it. I realized that academia wasn't really for me. I wasn't really a classic academic. I enjoyed the field aspects of it, but I wasn't very strong at statistics, and I could see other people were going to kind of flourish in an academic career, but I wanted to do something else, something a bit different. So I left academia. I followed my then girlfriend, now wife, and moved down to the south of England and changed careers and became a consultant ecologist for a year or two, picking up a local job and working for a big consultancy organization, essentially advising clients about what they can and can't do within wildlife law. And that was fun. It got me out into nature again. It uses my species identification skills. I'm quite good at birds and plants and insects and everything else because of, my background. But it didn't really match my values. And I think after a year or two of doing that, I felt like I was helping businesses to develop rather than conserving wildlife. And so I kind of pivoted and changed direction again and moved into the charity sector where I was for, well, almost 10 years. So I worked for an organization called BirdLife International. They're an international partnership of bird and nature conservation NGOs based around the globe in 120 countries with around 120 partners, one per country at that time. And my role started out in communications. So I was managing website and social media channels and spreading the message, building campaigns. I then moved within BirdLife to the Pacific region out of Fiji, and I managed I was the program development manager for BirdLife Pacific. That meant developing projects across 7 or 8 different Pacific countries, and more importantly, raising funding for them, essentially writing proposals, grant proposals, speaking to donors, securing the funds to make sure those projects were run and delivered. I then moved back to the UK and became, I guess, like a marketing manager for BirdLife, which was really merging my communications and fundraising skills to develop attractive campaigns to raise funds and the attention for kind of some of our conservation projects. So across 10 years, I kind of merged across different areas within BirdLife and the kind of the BirdLife family. During that time, and particularly moving back to the UK, I wanted to kind of start my own enterprise, my own conservation organization. I explored myself sort of deeply and thought, what am I good at? What do I like doing? And also, what are the needs within the market? And actually, I was also trying to recruit my role in Fiji and struggling to find a good place online to really put kind of conservation jobs that were international in nature. So I decided to start my own kind of conservation enterprise, or eco enterprise as I call it, which is something that puts kind of profit and purpose at its heart. And that's conservation careers, really. We are here to provide honest, effective, and transparent support that gets people hired quicker. And we envisage a world where wildlife thrives and conservationists are having successful careers. So really, we started Conservation Careers as a job board 10 years ago now, sharing international jobs from around the globe, showcasing how many jobs are out there and the diversity within the marketplace and how it's growing, expanding all the time. And at the same time, helping people to explore where they want to work within the conservation sector and how to find jobs, and sharing really good kind of careers advice and developing trainings around kind of skills and career navigation at the same time. So in a nutshell, that's where I've been. That's what I've done. Started out as a side hustle 10 years ago, and it became full-time within, I guess, 2 or 3 years, something like that. And now I can't imagine doing anything else.
What are some of the key barriers people face when they're starting their career in conservation, and how can these be tackled to improve equality, diversity, and inclusion?
Yeah, thanks, Anish. Key barriers, I think, for people looking to start a career in conservation, some of the key barriers relate to getting the right kind of education and experience. So, and one thing that I think is really important to me, and I've just jumped off another podcast where I was talking to someone else who talked about this too. Experience kind of beats education hands down, I think, nowadays. So really getting experience and showing that you can do a job, evidencing that you can do a job to employers is so important, often more important than a piece of paper saying you have a degree or a master's or something like that. Those are still important, but actually if you can showcase an employer, you can do it. That's really vital. So, getting that experience becomes a key kind of challenge early in your career. Okay, so really for that, yes, you can pay money and you can get volunteerships and internships, but some of the best things to do is to kind of stand back, understand your career options, like, what are you good at? What do you love doing? What sort of job would you like to do? Finding a target or a niche or an area you'd like to work in and kind of specialize within, then becoming really really employable for that chosen area and bridging any gaps you might find through finding or creating quality experiences. I think that's so important. Yeah. And you can do that in your free time. You can create your own experiences through developing partnerships and other ways of kind of getting that sort of stuff. And that's probably one of the key barriers, I think, for people who are looking to aspire to work in conservation and getting their kind of first foot in the door.
For teenagers who are completing their secondary education and dreaming of joining conservation, what could their career path look like?
Career paths, career paths are developing all the time within conservation. It's something that's been kind of sorely missed. it's a goal of our organization to actually create and lay down clear career paths into the sector. So if you wanted to be a nurse or a doctor or a teacher, typically you know what you need to do. You do step A, B, and C, and that leads to D. In conservation, that's not been so clear. But if we could give careers advice to kind of people, kind of secondary education stage, I would say sort of, first of all, like get passionate about wildlife, and stay passionate, deepen your interest. This is the time just to kind of really kind of go out, explore, enjoy, learn, connect with others, find other people who share your interest, join a group, or form a group or whatever it might be, and kind of really get passionate about that thing. Secondly, if you want to kind of follow this academically, then getting a degree, in a kind of related area to your interest, that's biology or ecology or something like that, zoology, will help, and it will help to kind of, develop your knowledge of an area. Master's degrees can also help you to kind of stand out from the crowd. So that's typically the kind of route at the moment. But as I've sort of said, I think experience does beat education hands down. So you don't have to do a master's degree. In fact, we've done a review of all the different roles within conservation right now, and we find really kind of eight or even 9 out of 10 roles don't require master's degrees, and actually you can kind of get the experience you're looking for in other ways. But yeah, in a nutshell, develop your passion, get some experience and get a bit of education as well. That's going to kind of lead you into that direction. But now's a kind of great time once you're kind of at secondary education stage to kind of really really connect with your passion and really fuel it, because that will propel you forwards into your career.
What are some critical academic skills which aspiring conservationists should develop during their educational training?
I think in terms of academic skills, for a start, conservation is a huge sector. So we list 15,000 conservation jobs on our website per year, and that's still the tip of the iceberg. So it's much bigger and more diverse than most people realize and probably understand. So yes, there are academic jobs within conservation. There are science and research jobs kind of classically, and they are popular, and they certainly exist. And so there are academic skills there which will help for those roles. So things like, scientific method, critical thinking, understanding the problems and solutions to those problems, species ID, I'd probably kind of cover within all that as well. But I would sort of say, sort of standing back from that, there are lots of skills that are valued that aren't just academic. And I hate to say it, I do feel like, lots of universities and university courses don't typically prepare conservationists necessarily for the real world, and they don't necessarily deliver the kind of core skills that the industry are looking for. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to kind of to reframe a lot of the courses and the trainings within the academic sector to really deliver what academics are, what the conservation sector, are actually looking for on the ground. I think we're going to talk about that a bit more in a minute, but it's quite worth sort of highlighting here that we need much more than academic skills. And in fact, those skills are less valued and less important than some of the other things that conservationists need nowadays.
What would be your advice to working professionals who wish to aspire to switch careers?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for people who are sort of mid-career looking to switch. We help and support them quite regularly within conservation. And it can be quite, I guess, daunting from the outside. There's a lot of kind of imposter syndrome, but more and more conservationists and the sector are employing professionals from outside the sector and bringing them in. Okay, realizing we need to kind of professionalize the industry, and a lot of the kind of the skills that we require actually are found outside, and that's where we are recruiting for. Just standing back and asking the question, how do people switch careers into conservation or even into other, career paths also? I would start by really doing some kind of self-reflection and understanding yourself in the first instance. So, really asking yourself quite kind of deep career questions about, what skills do you have? What do you like doing? What are you good at doing? Within which context do you thrive? Do you like being outside or inside, on your own, in groups? Understand yourself at kind of quite a deep kind of level, if you like, is a kind of good solid foundation for stepping forwards. From there, understanding, what are the kind of different jobs and career paths that you could go into with that skill set. And within conservation, like, what does the employment landscape look like? We've talked a little bit about it being much broader than, say, science and research or wardens and rangers. Nowadays, it's communicators, it's project managers, it's fundraisers, it's ecotourism managers, it's wildlife vets, it's 1,000 different things. It's a big industry. So understanding yourself and then your employment options helps you to kind of create a target role, or at least gives you direction within which kind of move forwards in your career. I think kind of looking to enter like a competitive arena, like joining the kind of conservation sector is certainly in the early days of securing that first job. I kind of like to use the metaphor as a bit like kind of entering, say, I don't like the Olympic Games where you're trying to secure a gold medal. There's different ways of trying to kind of secure that first paying job, or that gold medal at the Olympics. So, and if you think about it as like two different approaches, like you could go to the Olympics and say, I'm going to go for every event. I'm going to enter all 50 events. And through that, I'm giving myself 50 chances of securing, say, a gold medal. The problem with that, as you can realize, and the same with entering the job market, so I'm going to go for lots of different types of jobs, and hopefully one of them will stick by putting applications out, is you're always going to be up against people who are kind of more competitive than you and who specialized at a niche that suited them earlier and then doubled down and became really good at it. Think about like, Michael Phelps in the pool, someone who's really tall, huge wingspan, built for swimming, and, doubled down, became, the world's best at that. If you don't find your niche and something that suits you well, it's going to be very hard to become competitive for that. So standing back, understanding yourself, understanding what your niche might be, and then saying, okay, so what are employers looking for my chosen niche? Let's say it's fundraising, for instance. That's the place you want to kind of go into. Then saying, okay, what are the kind of core skills for fundraising? It's proposal writing, it's kind of managing events, perhaps. It's project management. It's budgets, actually, as well, like finances and that sort of stuff. So what have you got in your career to date that matches what employers are looking for, the evidence? But most importantly, where are the gaps? What gaps do I need to fill and how am I going to fill them? Okay. Once you get that clarity, you can kind of then you can fill those gaps with skills or knowledge or experiences or whatever the best way of doing it. Doesn't always necessarily take lots of time, doesn't always necessarily take lots of money. Okay. But it's being really strategic about having that clarity of target, bridging, filling any gaps, and then really nuts and bolts of putting in really good applications, developing really good applications, CV resumes, cover letters, and developing really good interviews as well. The other thing I want to kind of say around kind of switching careers is there's different ways of switching careers. And when we look at kind of jobs within conservation, we think about things in terms of kind of cause and role. Okay, so what is the cause that you're seeking to tackle? That can be really important for many in some careers. So for me, in my early career, the cause I was really cared deeply about was kind of birds and bird conservation. It's Barn Owl PhD and then BirdLife International. I was really cared about bird conservation. A lot of people want to work in conservation because they have a cause they care particularly about. And often switches, it's kind of the cause that's out of alignment, not necessarily the role. I'll give you a good example of that. So we work, and now who works for us actually, someone called Lloyd Gofton, who is brilliant in communications and PR and has been working in kind of corporate PR communications for 15, 20 years, something like that, but he's really passionate about marine animals. He wanted to be a marine conservationist. So we sort of worked with him to define, okay, where does he want to go? How does he want to use his skills? Does he want to retrain entirely? And really the skills he had in terms of communications and PR were sought after in conservation. We know that. There's a huge growth in comm skills. And he enjoys and is very good at using them, but he just didn't like deploying those skills for Mazda or Pizza Hut or any one of his other clients that he was working for. The pivot he needed to make was just kind of switching the cause. It wasn't the what he was doing, it's the why he was doing it. So, we helped him to kind of understand the kind of marine conservation sector. He then pivoted careers and became a kind of marine communications manager, if you like. So he had all the skills. It was just the kind of the cause and the kind of the why, if you like, that was missing from his career. And for some, that might be it. It's just you're doing the work, you've got the skills, you just need to go and do it for a conservation organization. And your job probably exists within conservation if you look deep enough. Even if you were an accountant, you can go and become an accountant for a conservation organization, connect more with the cause and the purpose. Or you can kind of switch both. You might want to just say, I want to do something for a cause I feel passionately about, and I don't like my current job, I want to do something entirely different, in which case it's kind of a double switch. You're kind of changing the cause and the role. And obviously there'll be a few more kind of, gaps to bridge within that, but that's still possible as well. So hopefully that helps, just understand yourself, understand the industry, where you want to go. A lot of the time you can bring your skills with you into the industry too, and it's just about pivoting into kind of the different cause that you're most interested about.
That brings me to the next question, which is, what are some of the most critical non-academic skills which are in high demand in conservation, and why?
Yeah, well, we did a review of this. So we looked across something like 40,000 conservation jobs and did a review looking for the most in-demand skills across lots of different job types. And the pattern was really clear, actually. It stood out really clear. They are project management. So, the conservation sector is looking for people who can manage projects and or programs, program being a collection of projects. It's people with communication skills, communications and marketing skills. Okay. So can you manage websites, social media audiences? Can you write news stories? Can you edit and record podcasts nowadays and all sorts of other things? Okay. So communication is really important. How do we kind of reach an audience? How do we convey messages? How do we bring more support into the movement? Really important. And then fundraising, the final piece, how do we raise the money needed to deliver the projects and programs on the ground? Those are the kind of three pillars that we saw. There's more to it than that, but those are the kind of three recurring pillars that we find across lots of different job types. And we did that reviews because we're developing trainings for the kind of most sought after skills. So then we found project management training experts, communication training experts. Lloyd, I just mentioned, he leads our comms course, and fundraising also experts too, to kind of develop projects and training courses and programs around those kind of core skills that we see. Those are skills conservationists need and want. And those are the skills I think more universities need to be developing too. I mean, on a side note, we are collaborating with a university now in the UK, University of Newquay, part of Plymouth University, to develop and launch this autumn in September. We're hoping for our new cohort start and a master's course in conservation project management. And we're building project management, communications, and fundraising into that course because we know that's what employers want. And for me, that's what universities need to be delivering for their students nowadays. So, yeah, that's probably a long answer to quite a short question, Anish.
What are some of the most prominent challenges people face? I'll rephrase. What are some of the most prominent challenges which early career conservationists face?
Some of the prominent challenges for early career conservationists. So these are people early in their career, they've secured their first job, and they're kind of facing some barriers. I think some of the first of all, if you're in employment, then you kind of overcome one of the biggest challenges, which is securing the first paying role, because from there on in, you're being paid to develop and become more employable and to develop your experiences kind of day to day in a role. So you've kind of overcome, I think, probably the most difficult barrier, which is kind of securing that first paying role. So, I think you should celebrate that moment and knowing that you kind of, you've kind of crashed through the kind of hardest barrier. I think from there on in, the kind of key challenges become around kind of being impactful in your role, avoiding burnout as well, because it's quite a kind of a key problem within the sector when people are just working for passion. If that's what's driving you, it's very easy to become burnt out within that environment if you're not careful. And also the career development as well, like, developing your career, knowing where you're going and how you're going to get there. So just speaking to those three things, like, being impactful, I think being really good and being really professional within your role. So how do you manage your time? How do you manage your projects, your budgets, your to-do lists, your tasks, and understanding, how you place your effort to have the most outcome for conservation. I think that's something a lot of people wrestle with, and things you can learn as well. Things, even just simple things like the Pareto rule, which is 80-20, 80% of your impact comes from 20% of your activities. So what are those 20% of the things that you're doing that creates all those impacts? And double down, do more of them. Understanding that, actually you can create a lot of impact with the approach of like good enough. Not everything has to be perfect. If perfect takes 100 hours, actually good enough can take just 20 hours. You can get 5 times as much done. So just understanding like concepts around productivity and where impact lies and how to manage time and to-do lists and all that sort of stuff is a kind of core challenge, which I think more people need to focus on to make sure their time is very well spent. Burnout, I mentioned as well, looking after yourself, understanding, I guess, how to switch off, when to switch off, how to maintain a balance, how to ask for help. I'm not an expert on any of that whatsoever. And I've certainly felt burnout myself a few times in my career. I'm quite kind of conscious of it, but it's something that as an industry, we need to, I think, own it a bit more and support people more through it. And part of that needs to come from the individual themselves, knowing when to stop and knowing when to say no, and knowing when to put things down, and knowing when you'll be more productive if you take a rest. Okay, so that's something that I think certainly hits early career and probably mid and late career professionals too. And then career development, I think sort of investing in yourself, building your network is really important in conservation. We are a global family. We're all connected. We all know each other reasonably well, or we certainly know people that know us. It's a small community really, even though it's growing, and it's all about supporting and working together. And we are a kind of we're a very friendly, approachable, collaborative community. In terms of career development, like, developing deeply, knowing when and where to move, not getting stuck in a career cul-de-sac. I think there are a lot of people who work for fairly small organizations that don't have anywhere to go in terms of their career development. There's very few jobs above them, and maybe those people have been there for a long time and will continue to do so. So, reflecting on how are you going to develop? Does that mean moving elsewhere? Does it mean starting your own thing? Just thinking a bit more proactively about your career and when to do those sorts of things. And something that's really helped me actually, throughout my career is like once a year I write a diary, an annual diary between Christmas and New Year. I've got like a book I pull out every year and I sort of reflect, how are things going? How's my life going and how's my career going? Giving myself things like marks out of 10 on various different aspects. You can do it however you want. But the key thing for that is just checking in and reflecting and then spotting patterns. So once or twice I've looked at that and seen actually my career is a 6 out of 10, there's a 5 out of 10, there's a 4 out of 10, and seeing actually things have got worse. And the problems I had 3 years ago are still problems now. And I've not managed to address them for 3 years, and I need to make that change. And I think without that kind of check-in and just reflecting on what's going on a kind of semi-regular basis and once a year in a bullet-formed list is quite simple, has really helped me to sort of wake up, smell the roses and do something about it. So I'd encourage people to kind of do that.
You have raised over £2.5 million for conservation projects across 120 countries. So what has made you so effective in fundraising for conservation? And broadly, where are conservationists lacking in their fundraising skills and how can they improve?
Yeah, fundraising it's so important. And actually, it's a really employable skill. Obviously, if you can kind of showcase to an employer that you have and can raise funds, then it makes you very employable. It's a good skill set to have, across, again, lots of different roles. But there are specialist fundraisers too who do the job really well, and I mean, I was lucky enough to be a fundraiser for, a couple of years, as I mentioned, as you sort of mentioned at the moment. What are the skills that good fundraisers have? I think at their core, it's like communication skills is so important. What you're doing really is understanding the project needs of the people on the ground and then finding the donors out there who would be interested in the project and then telling the story of the project to the donor in a language and in a way that they'll find engaging. Okay, so really it's a bit like a salesman on the showroom of a car showroom. As someone comes in, making sure that they kind of see the right car and you sell it to them in the right way, using language they're going to understand is what fundraising is all about. And you can do that verbally at events. You can do that in a written way in proposals to donors. But really, it is a communications challenge fundraising. I'll give you an example of that. So when I was out in the Pacific, we had lots of different projects. One was a rare, critically endangered bird called the Fiji petrel. It's a seabird that is found on a small island in Fiji called Nau. And on that island, the birds nest in burrows under the ground. They're found in kind of cloud forest, and the landscape was managed by local communities. The birds that were ground nesting were impacted by invasive species. There were things like pigs and mongoose and cats and rats and things like that shouldn't be there, that were actually digging up burrows, finding eggs, eating chicks, things like that. So really there's like one species that goes out to hunt at sea, out in the kind of marine environment looking for its food. That one species, you can sort of tell that story in 5, 6, 7, 8 different ways to different donors. So if you're interested in, let's say, invasive species, well, there's a very clear invasive species story there. And there are donors that will fund just that. So we can talk about the ground nesting burrow birds with all the pigs and rats and everything else that's kind of impacting them. There are people interested in community-based conservation projects. Well, this is a community-based conservation project because it's part of the kind of community that manage the forest. The local people are very proud of their Fiji petrels. Well, it's the only place on the planet this bird breeds that's known to exist. If you're interested in marine conservation, well, this bird flies out to sea looking for fish. It's out there kind of, and impacted, by local fisheries and bycatch and issues around that. If you're interested in climate change, it's found in a forest environment, which is a cloud forest. If you're interested in forest conservation, they live in and so on. The point being is we can sort of pitch one project through lots of different lenses to try and get the work done that we want to do on the ground. So that kind of communication skill of really pivoting, and it's very similar, I would say, to to writing a job application. Really, it's understanding what the employer's looking for and how you fit it. And it's the kind of matchmaking skill that really kind of good fundraisers kind of need to develop within themselves. The one thing I'd also say about kind of fundraising is it's the sort of thing that's so important, but not a lot of people really enjoy it. It's hard work. It's just like applying for jobs. It's a hard grind, you know. You can take moments of success when you secure funds and be really happy, and you should success. So you should celebrate around that. But before you know it, you have to come and do it again and kind of raise the funds again and write the new proposal. And I found it, you know, quite stressful, to be honest, in terms of maintaining a certain level of income to make sure that the organization I was working for would thrive, and knowing that people would still be in jobs next year and the year beyond, you know, because if you don't raise the funds, that's not going to happen. So, you know, it's a really good skill to have. It can be quite a stressful environment to work within, but it's incredibly valuable in terms of your career and the impact that you can have.
Why are communication and public speaking skills so important for conservation? And how can individuals become more effective in this regard?
Comm skills, yeah, as I sort of mentioned before, you know, they are really valued. You're right. You know, we know that they're a kind of core skill across lots of different jobs. And actually the fundraising example, you know, just now is probably a good example of that. You know, if you can't tell your story, you won't raise the funds. We are, as a community, really good, I think, at kind of, I guess, preaching to the converted. We're very good at talking to ourselves and talking to people who are already passionate and interested in the subject and bringing, you know, those people kind of closer to us. What we need to do more of, if we're going to really kind of turn the declines around that we see within the wildlife sector, is bring new people into the movement. So people who are the unconverted, people who don't really care about wildlife right now, perhaps some of the businesses out there or the governments or whoever that might be. You know, we need good comm skills. We need good communicators to reach those people, understand those audience, and bring them into the movement. And that's something that I think conservation organizations have really woken up to in the last sort of 10, 15 years, and why we've been recruiting from outside the sector in, why we have people like Lloyd now working for marine conservation organizations, because it's the only way we kind of going to kind of grow the movement, really. Yeah, I mean, if we can't convey a message, you know, we can't really make a difference. So yeah, that's really a solid part of, you know, who conservation organizations are nowadays, is kind of building those kind of comm skills. I guess the other thing just to mention around that is that the way I sort of see things nowadays in terms of communications and the kind of the logic and the impact train, if you like, the theory of impact really is like, nowadays charities are here to kind of influence voters, really, who can then influence governments. Okay, and then the governments can then influence and put better policies in place to try to incentivize the private sector to conserve nature more rapidly and at scale. You know, the charity sector are doing a great job. They're doing really amazing work around the globe. They've got some great projects and it's growing, and that's great. But, you know, there is a glass ceiling as to how far a charity can grow, because it's very limited by how much donations and fundraising it can kind of bring in. There's that kind of glass ceiling there. And I think charities account for something like 2% of global GDP. The other, you know, 90 odd plus percent is largely the kind of private sector. So our challenge nowadays within conservation is working with the private sector and bringing them on board in terms of conservation. And really how that happens is through changing policies and getting incentives from government. So the whole chain comes from, you know, charities having clear messages which influence voters, which then influence governments and what's on their agenda, what's important to them, that helps them to then incentivize the private sector to make that difference. And we are starting to kind of see that chain kind of coming through. Here in the UK, we have, you know, biodiversity net gain, a target whereby companies now have to legally show that they're having a positive impact from biodiversity, not a negative impact. And they are managing and creating new habitats, you know, to improve things for wildlife. And that's all come through that sort of kind of model about effective communications that often spill out and come from charities in the first instance.
How can LinkedIn be used by conservationists both for conservation and their own careers?
LinkedIn, I think it's an incredible tool nowadays. We use it quite a lot at Conservation Careers. We've got a really busy kind of LinkedIn group. But really, you know, the nuts and bolts of LinkedIn is all about, well, I guess twofold. One is like finding opportunities, you know, recruitment, jobs, who's hiring, who are the people behind it. But secondly, I think much more important is around networking and finding people to work with. and to support and really kind of to make friends in the world, So, I'll be honest, I say yes to anyone who sends me a LinkedIn contact because, more often than not, you never know when that contact's going to be useful to you and how then that person can communicate with you and kind of network with us in return. So I would absolutely use it for, growing your network, for finding the right people, for doing career research, for reaching out and asking for support, for finding opportunities that are out there that are maybe either published or perhaps hidden, for getting recommendations, for lots of different reasons. So if you haven't got a LinkedIn profile, I would definitely start one, fill it in and start connecting with others and using it as a really valuable kind of career development and networking tool.
Talk about some of the training provided by Conservation Careers.
Yeah, we provide quite a few different training programs, and we're sort of developing and growing all the time. Our flagship program, really for aspiring conservationists, is called the Conservation Career Kickstarter, and it's a program that leads people through really what we've talked about already, a program of self-reflection, understanding yourself, understanding the job market, what your niche might be, understanding where the gaps might be that you need to fill and how you're going to fill them, and then how you're going to kind of put that together in terms of a career plan. So the Kickstarter is for job seekers, for students, and for career switchers who are seeking clarity within their career and a plan to kind of put it into action. So yeah, we've been running that for, 5, 6, 7 years. It started off as workshops. It's now been an online course since 2018. And we've had maybe 2,500 plus people through that program. Building out from that and following the review that we did, we've also been building out kind of more skills-based training courses. The first one being conservation project management and design, which teaches people the method known as the conservation standards, which is an internationally built and recognized project management and development framework developed by WWF and many other organizations to develop really good, sound conservation projects, kind of learn the lessons, evolve and improve over time. So we have a program around that. We also have one around fundraising for communications projects and also for communications around conservation projects as well. So the core skills of project management, design, fundraising and communications are the kind of three kind of skills pillars where we've kind of recruited the best experts in class to come in, develop, and then support people through those training programs.
So what is Conservation Career doing to improve equality, diversity, and inclusion?
Yeah, it's so important, to improve access to conservation, improve the diversity within the conservation market as well. If you can't see yourself in it, then really you can't be in it. So a core part of what we've been doing is try to speak to as many people from as many backgrounds and nationalities as possible. We started a few years back now, 5, 6 years ago, something called conservation diversity, where we're trying to speak to conservationists from every country and territory around the planet and kind of share their stories, and share their messages as well. So we're kind of slowly kind of working around the planet on the podcast and on interviews on the website to showcase what's going on and to help other people kind of see themselves in the movement as well. Alongside that, as we just discussed, really, we do a lot of training programs for conservationists, around project management, fundraising, communications, Kickstarter, and we've supported people from all backgrounds and nationalities kind of through those training programs. I probably shouldn't promote it, but we do it quite quietly on the side. We do let people kind of through on kind of bursaries just to kind of improve access, but we don't publish that or promote that so widely. But yeah, I'll share it with you and your audience. We do kind of help wherever we can, where we see kind of real potential in people, we support them.
What are some of the other projects being run by Conservation Career?
We've got a lot going on, and we will continue to have a lot going on into the future. Things that are of relevance, I guess, to the audience, we have a membership scheme called the Conservation Careers Academy. The name is likely to change actually quite soon, but it's the Academy at the moment, which is a kind of a low-level membership community in terms of the financial commitment. But what you get through that is access to all the jobs that we kind of collate onto our website. We collate 15,000 jobs a year, so it's sort of the biggest conservation job board on the planet, and that's growing. You also get access to beyond just jobs. We have a huge community platform called CC Pro, where we have nearly 2,000 aspiring professional conservationists in our own private network, where they get access to regular events, questions and answers with myself and my team, and great resources that we have like as part of our membership scheme as well. So we have the academy, which is really good for people looking to kind of navigate and kind of get their careers on track and then kind of propel themselves forwards. We are very quietly on the side doing a beta launch at the moment of what we call in the professional development program for mid-career conservation professionals looking to kind of have greater clarity in terms of their career direction, to find more impact and also focus on their well-being as well, things we talked about a little bit earlier in the podcast. I'm not sure if that's going to be quite a public launch yet, but we're kind of doing a beta launch at the moment. We've been piloting that at 2 different big organizations here in the UK, and the feedback's been absolutely excellent. So we're kind of rolling that out. So that'll become a public offering before too long. And then we've been also supporting people on what we've been calling our Pathways program, which is more for early career professionals, which is around kind of our Kickstarter alongside kind of like a combined kind of coaching program as well, more for career switchers. And again, we're looking to develop, evolve, and roll that out more widely soon. People are just interested in who we are and what we do. We've got loads of stuff going on for free on our websites. We have a weekly newsletter where we kind of share the latest jobs and guides and resources that we kind of develop ourselves. We have a podcast, a bit like you, Anish. We have a podcast that goes out about every 2 weeks. I'm not great at schedules, but we speak to conservationists across the planet about what it's like to do their jobs, how they got to where they are, what advice they'd give others, and really kind of showcase honest, effective, and transparent careers advice that get people hired quicker. Yeah, and there's a lot more going on, but those are probably the key things I'll probably highlight to you today.
And what are some of the most prominent challenges and lessons from your conservation career?
Some of the most pressing challenges from my career, I think really it's around finding and feeling my impact. You know, as a conservationist, you want to know that you're having impact. You want to understand what that impact is and how you've helped to create it. So at various times in my career, I've sort of felt very close to that impact. And at other times I felt, more distant. So when I was doing my barn owl research, I was putting lots of nest boxes up and monitoring chicks and helping to manage the habitat, I felt really close to what I was doing at the very kind of local scale, at the kind of reserve scale, really. But I didn't feel that was a very wide impact. Whereas when I was doing communications activities, sort of stepping back, I was maybe doing press releases and news stories that were reaching thousands or hundreds of thousands or whatever as an audience. But I didn't really understand what impact those news stories were having. So I think one challenge for me is sort of having an impact that's at a kind of wide, broad, large scale, like communications, but then understanding and feeling the connection that impact has had to know that I made a difference at some level. I think fundraising got close to that for a while, as in terms of I helped to develop this project and program. I helped to raise the funds was kind of a key part of the kind of a link in the chain, if you like, of impact. And so that when the funds dropped in, I knew that, a big part of that was what I managed to achieve as part of that kind of big team effort. But just kind of constantly pivoting and reflecting and trying to, hone in on a place where I feel like I can have an impact. And I think Conservation Careers is really helping me to do that. I understand the people that we're helping. I often know them all personally as we see them developing their careers, finding their jobs, developing, moving on, coming back for more support later. I really like what we're doing. So rather than like an impact of one, just me, we now have an impact of thousands of people who are out there in their careers, working, flourishing, enjoying their careers because of what we've done here at Conservation Careers. So I feel like sort of multiplier impact has kind of come out from that. So I think careers are, they're squiggly. We want to make them as straight line as possible through proper reflection and planning. But, for most of us, it is quite squiggly and we kind of learn as we go. So reflection, finding impact, finding this niche that I found for myself. And then probably the last point of reflection would be around kind of a challenge around sort of starting a business. I talked a little bit about how I think we need to kind of expand beyond the charity model into the private sector. I think we need many more businesses for good. We need ecopreneurs. That's what I call myself. We need people who are starting businesses that generate a profit and grow and have purpose at their core in terms of the bigger they get, the more purpose and impact they can have. We need like a business model that fuels conservation. And there's not many of them yet, and we need many more of them. So, that's the kind of challenge is like, what are the business models? What are the kind of services and products we can create that will help to conserve wildlife? And we sort of got one model with Conservation Careers, but we need lots more out there. And that's a kind of core challenge I faced. And I think the kind of the movement faces right now.
That was a final question I had for you today. Thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you, Anish. Thank you. Well, it's been a real pleasure talking to you.
If you made it till the end of this podcast, feel free to leave your thoughts on the topic and do not forget to share and subscribe. Before we end the podcast, I would like to share another list of conservation books which I highly recommend. This time it is on the topic of rewilding and ecological restoration. The first is a seminal book called Rewilding: The Radical New Science of Ecological Recovery by Glenn Blight and Paul Chipson, which covers the restoration of ecological processes and ecosystem functioning by the reintroduction of species, especially megaherbivores. A less technical and science-heavy book is Rewilding Africa: The Restoration of Wilderness on a War-Ravaged Continent, which explores conservation across various heavily militarized landscapes. And the final book is Wilder: How Rewilding is Transforming Conservation and Changing the World. This covers the rewilding of various charismatic species ranging from pumas in the US to the Arabian oryx in the Middle East and giant tortoise. And with that, I would like to end this episode of the Think Wildlife podcast. See you next Monday.